Thank you very much for everybody being on here now, whether it's good morning to you, good afternoon, or good evening. What we are going to talk about throughout the course of the next 40 to 45 minutes is the psychology of sales. And if you didn't kind of catch it in my background, just a little bit more on me is uh, I do also have an athletic background, but I've done 5 Ironman triathlons, 29 marathons, a 100-mile ultra marathon run. My master's degree was in sports psychology, so I don't expect you to be persuaded or overwhelmed by any of these things that I've done. But the fact of the matter is, when we are talking about peak performance psychology, whether we're talking about working with athletes and how they are able to get the best out of themselves, or whether we are talking about sales leaders, is to me, all of this comes down to our mindset and our ability to master kind of the 6 inches of real estate in between our ears. Because I'll explain why throughout the course of this webinar, but I just really feel like psychology is the foundation on our house. And I think so often in sales, especially, we hear about closing techniques and we hear about persuasion, like we're going to talk about next week, and we hear about how to solidify meetings and things like that. But if you're not able to really wake up every single day and raise your game and show up as the best version of yourself, I don't think a lot of these other things matter. So I really feel like raising your game and the extraordinary results that we're all looking for come from some of these daily strategies that we're going to talk about in regards to our psychology. And I'm really only going to talk about 5 different things. It's what I would call the basic fundamentals of peak performance psychology and being able to get the best out of yourself. And before we go into that, I just want you to understand how this can translate to results. So the first case study that I'm just going to go over is from a peak performance psychology standpoint. A couple of years ago, I did a year-long engagement with a global medical device company, and it happened to be with their recovery sciences division. And the company had gone through a lot of restructuring. They had multiple presidents come in to try to lead the division. They had not only their sales compensation plan changed, but territories restructured. And the bottom line is the culture of the company was just not great. There was a lot of turmoil. And quite honestly, like a bad athletic team, let's say, professional or otherwise, they just had a long history of losing, and it really affected their attitude and it affected their psychology. So we did a 1-year engagement centered on peak performance psychology and a lot of the concepts I'm going to talk about today. And the results were phenomenal. And the way that it looked like, without revealing all of the numbers, is that 74% of their sales reps achieved positive growth. 65% of the reps hit their yearly quota. The division, Recovery Sciences, finished at 101% of their goal. And more than anything else, it was the first time in 6 years that this team and that the division was actually winning. And I have no idea where you are and come into this webinar right now. I have no idea if your company or if your sales territory may be struggling in the same way. But these same principles that would allow you to turn around, let's say, a losing organization are actually the same things that would allow you to go from maybe you're already doing pretty well and you just want extraordinary results, but these same peak performance psychology principles apply. So I really want to make that crystal clear that, what I'm going to talk about throughout the course of today, these are the types of results, not guaranteeing anything, that you can potentially get if you master the psychology of peak performance. So to go into the 2 different orientations that I first started learning about this when I was doing my master's degree in sports psychology. If you really look at high achievers and if you look at how they are wired, whether we're talking about athletes or whether we're talking about sales leaders, like what are they saying to themselves every day and what is their their orientation, as we called it, towards high achievement. Like, why are they able to be so good? And when we look at outperform and the definition being to surpass an excellence of performance or to do better than, we can look at this in terms of two different ways. And the first way, in terms of a high achievement orientation, is what we call an ego orientation. An ego orientation, an athlete could be looking at another athlete and saying, I want to surpass an excellence of performance relative to someone else. In sales, this is you looking out and you saying, I want to I want to gain a competitive advantage in the industry, or I'm looking at what kind of other people are doing and I'm stacking up what I'm doing relative to maybe someone else in the industry, or it could be even that you're motivated by going against someone else in your own company. Like you have kind of that competitive drive and you want to outperform relative to someone else. And if you look at high achievers, are they wired with a certain amount of that kind of competitive drive and what we call ego orientation? Yes, they absolutely are. But the second part, and what I'm really hoping that you get out of this webinar, is what we call a mastery orientation. And a mastery orientation, as simplistic as it sounds, is just waking up every single day and thinking about, how can I make my strengths extraordinary, and how can I turn my weaknesses into strengths? Or in other words, how can I just show up as the best version of myself and continue to improve on whatever I'm currently doing? And the highest achievers on the planet in sales or business or anything else are all wired with this intrinsic pursuit of growth and what they want to make happen. So that's really my hope for you throughout the course of this webinar, is that you can identify at least one or two or perhaps three things where you say, you know what, Scott, I know that I could be doing this just a little bit better than I'm doing it right now. And the way that this looks like, when this is straight out of my book, Outperform the Norm, when I kind of stack up what to me the norm, or let's say sales amateurs say to themselves versus sales outperformers, I actually have a poster of this hanging in my office, but I always want to reinforce, what am I saying to myself every single day? Like, if there's something that I need to do in my sales business, if I know I need to get out there and I need to network more, or I know that I need to make more cold calls and prospect more, am I saying, well, I don't have time right now? Or am I saying to myself, I will make it a priority? If something isn't going well in my business, am I making excuses for that? Or am I being held accountable for the results and the things that are happening? Am I comfortable, or am I out there really challenging myself in terms of what I'm doing? Am I being a leader? Am I focused on, especially if you're a sales leader and you have other people reporting to you, am I focused on getting the best out of others? Or am I just thinking about focused on me and how can I get mine? And I always like to stack up these things right next to each other, because it's powerful what you're saying to yourself each and every day. And with that, I'm just going to launch the first poll question on, how many thoughts do you think the average person has every single day? Go ahead and just answer that. It should be on your screen right now. And your options are 5,000, 50,000, or 500,000. We'll give it just a few more seconds. All right, and the results we got were 17% said 5,000, 44% said 50,000, and 39% said 100,000. And if you're wondering what the actual answer is, it is 50,000 thoughts. Now, any of those numbers seem extraordinarily high, don't they? I mean, and this isn't just one psychological study that says this. It's actually multiple studies that will validate that we have somewhere between 30 and 60,000. It usually averages out at about 50,000 thoughts that we have every single day. And it is just a massive number of thoughts that are going on throughout our head. And I think that's why it is so important that we manage our psychology for peak performance in terms of what we're doing. And it really feeds into my first point. Now, I know we have a lot of people from the US here, but we have people from all around the world on this webinar right now. The Super Bowl just got done. I am broadcasting this live from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you happen to be here from Minnesota, go Vikings. But it's the first thing that I want to talk about is the concept of how outperformers and great top sales leaders play to win. And I have a picture on here because, unfortunately, if we're talking about American football, the Minnesota Vikings are not always the strongest team. And we have a history of missing kicks and underperforming when the pressure is on or when we really need to be our best. And the reason that I have a field goal up here is I get that none of us are elite athletes kicking field goals for a professional football team, but we are all kicking figurative field goals every single day in our sales business. And why does this matter? I mean, it's the lens that we're looking through. It's the lens with which we see the world that makes this so important. And the bottom line of all of psychology and all of peak performance is the fact that thoughts affect feelings, which will affect behaviors. So when I'm talking about, like, down here at the bottom, the playing not to win versus playing not to lose, okay, whether we're kicking a field goal or whether we're going into a cold call or a presentation or a negotiation, what you are thinking right before you do that is going to affect your feelings, literally the physiological emotions going on throughout your body, and ultimately that is going to manifest itself in your behaviors. A really good example of this is, okay, if you're going to pick up the phone and if you're going to make a cold call immediately after this webinar, what you think about, whether you envision the person on the other end of the line having an objection, or whether you think that you're unprepared, or whether you think that the person maybe doesn't really truly need your product, idea, or service, or whether you think somebody else's product is better out there in the marketplace, any of those thoughts are going to affect the feelings, maybe the nerves or the tension or the things going on throughout your body, and it is going to manifest itself in your behaviors and what you actually do throughout the course of the cold call and throughout the course of the presentation or the negotiation. So I hope this makes sense, because as simplistic as it sounds, is when we look at how you get what you focus on in life, if we're talking about bad NFL kickers, let's say, bad kickers will say, I hope I don't miss this kick under the most intense pressure. The same way that a sales amateur will look at it and will say, I hope this person doesn't object. And if you understand how the human brain works, when you say, I hope this doesn't happen, or you're trying to steer away from something, all your brain actually hears throughout the course of that is objection or missing the kick. So in other words, you need to reframe that in terms of, how do I go out there and how do I win this deal? How do I get this initial meeting? How do I negotiate with this person effectively, and focus on the playing to win and what you want instead of the playing not to lose and what you are trying to avoid. Again, I know it sounds really, really simple, but especially when I was doing a lot more work with athletes, this was one of the first starting points I would use with all of them. And I'm convinced that if you're not doing the rigorous day-to-day activity that you need to be doing to grow your sales business, there's probably something going on in your thought patterns that are not translating to those feelings and you taking the behaviors that you need to do to be able to outperform. So that's number one. Number two, outperformers own the day. And I just happen to have a picture of Joe Mauer up here. He's going to be a Hall of Fame baseball player that just retired for the Twins. But you show me any successful person, I will show you someone that has the best habits and the best routines for success. And salespeople absolutely have them. They are just disciplined about it. And if you look at anybody that's ever gotten to a really high level in anything, they are methodical about what they do every single day, and they have those routines for peak performance. And one of the concepts that I like to talk about a lot is what I call the vital 4%. And you might not know, but 4% of your day is actually 1 hour. Like it's not a large chunk of time. But if I were to ask anybody on this webinar, what is the hardest part of anything in life? It's probably just getting started, right? Like it's just getting into that positive motion or that momentum. And once you've kind of gotten your day started and gotten into positive forward motion, it's so much easier to maintain it from there. So then it begs the question, okay, what are some of the most important things that we can do in that vital 4% or that first hour of the day that will really set the tone for an outperforming day? And I'm going to bring up, this leads to our second poll question, which are, what are the most important things that we can do to start each day? And go ahead and select one of the following there. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds to pull the last of the responses. All right, so final poll statistics were 24% said be grateful, 24% said focus on outcomes, and 53% said plan or prioritize the day. Now, this is somewhat of a trick question because you could be doing all of these. The two that we're certainly going to talk about are the be grateful and the plan and prioritize your day. And I'm going to explain in the next point why I don't necessarily think it's the best thing for sales outperformers to focus on outcomes. But when you really look at it, if I were to just stack up the things that I think we all need to do to be our best every single day, and we can say this personally and professionally, the first one is there is just more and more research coming out that show that the highest performers on the planet almost always have the highest amounts of gratitude. Like studies are actually showing that you can level up your amount of fulfillment and happiness in life by up to 30% with what they call intentional acts of gratitude. And I get that sales can be a brutally tough business because a lot of times you hear no so much more often than you hear yes, and it can take a toll on you over time. But consciously waking up every single day and thinking about what is good in my life and what am I grateful for, it's one of those things that, trust me, when you actually do this to start the day, it's like you're consciously engineering your day to start on that positive note rather than, oh, I wake up and I check my email and maybe somebody didn't get back to me or maybe a meeting happened to get pushed. And now all of a sudden you're looking at kind of negative things to start the day versus, no, I'm just going to consciously anchor in what's really good in my life. And if we do it, I promise you it affects everything after that. So that's number one, is gratitude. A couple of other things that you might not necessarily link to sales. I am a huge believer in taking care of yourself personally and the nutrition and the hydration. I could name a lot of different statistics that show how much hydration affects your cognitive functioning, your mental alertness, your energy levels. We can certainly talk about it in regards to blood sugar and things like that. But if you're really looking to outperform and looking for daily strategies to be able to be your best, breakfast. It is something that, simple as it sounds, in that vital 4%, waking up and having a really good, healthy breakfast can make a massive difference in your day. And a lot of studies have also shown that having a healthy breakfast will usually mean that you will make healthier choices for the rest of the day. Another one would be movement, or it would be exercise. The single greatest performance enhancer for our life, physically, mentally, emotionally, nothing else replicates the benefits of just moving our body around in terms of that physical and that mental and that emotional. It will make you better in sales, and it will make you better in life. And then that last part is to really focus on what matters in your business. And this is a single-minded focus on things that move the needle. And they're not necessarily outcomes, because really, if we're talking about the vital 4%, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Brian Tracy that said every minute spent planning saves 10 minutes in execution. So again, if we're stacking up kind of that vital 4%, I think waking up with an attitude of gratitude, having a good breakfast and hydration, moving the body a little bit, and then really planning and prioritizing what's going to move the needle in my business are all things that, if you just start the day that way, are going to have a massive impact on your results. Well, part of the reason that I said focusing on outcomes is not always something that I agree with. I mean, it's the basis for documentaries and things like The Secret, if you're familiar with that. Just focus on a Lamborghini, and eventually that Lamborghini is just going to manifest itself in your life. But really, if we look at it, and if we go to the third point, and one of the things that I talk to so many different populations about is what I call controlling the controllables. And this isn't a poll question, but if I just were to ask you, what are the things that you have 100% control over every single day? And if you're thinking about that, part of the reason that I have a AA battery on here is because we only really truly have 100% control over our attitude and our actions. That's where the AA battery comes from. And we're talking a lot about attitude on this, but when we come into actions, anytime I do goal setting with anyone, and especially a salesperson, is we're talking about outcomes. For salespeople, it's I have a quota that I need to attain, or a business has an amount of profit that it wants to generate, or an amount of gross revenue, or EBITDA, or some metric or target. The same way that a football team wants to win a Super Bowl, it's an outcome that, regardless of what you do, at the end of the day, you have to come to grips with. You only ever really have indirect control over that. Now, if you do activities really, really well, they'll probably make that outcome happen, but it's getting back to the controlling the controllables and the activities that really matter the most in your business. So this is straight out of my sales book, that if I were to look at, okay, what are some of the outperforming activities that you can be doing every single day, and how do they break down? To me, this is the basic fundamentals. Sort of like a sport would have basic fundamentals. Well, sales would have basic fundamentals as well. And they really break down to just 6 different things. The first one is an outperforming activity would be something to do with conditioning your mindset. It's the reason you're on the webinar right now. I will talk more about this later, but it is just doing something to improve your psychology or to improve your mind. The second activity would be some type of strategic planning. Now, you can look at this on a micro or a macro level. I mean, it could be something as simple as, in that vital 4%, you're waking up and you're saying, okay, how can I strategically plan my day for peak performance and to be able to get the most out of it? Or you can look at it on a macro level, where you're looking at from a quarterly perspective, or a bi-yearly perspective, or a yearly perspective, where you're planning and you're thinking about, what are these minutes that I can spend now that will save me 10 minutes in execution? And what is the most efficient and effective way to be able to deliver a result? That's strategic planning. Third, prospecting. It's, to me, the lifeblood of any business where you're going out there and you are generating new leads. Maybe it's cold calls, but it's trying to bring new customers into your business, and it's prospecting new sales targets and people that you want to bring in. The fourth one is presenting. It can be what I'm doing right now. It can be a virtual presentation. It can be live in front of someone. It can be a demo of a product, but it is presenting whatever you have to offer in your sales business. Following up with people that you've met with. Maybe you're following up with base business, but coming back to people that you have already met with where the deal maybe hasn't closed. And then the last one is technical knowledge. Technical knowledge would be, you want to be a master of your products, your services. It could be also looking out at what else is going on in the industry, industry knowledge as well. But the reason that I name out these outperforming activities is, if I were to just have you email me a copy of your calendar every single day, and I were to look at from a peak performance perspective, how are you allocating your time? What would this look like in terms of how much time is dedicated towards maybe improving your mindset or prospecting or presenting or following up? And I think these things can be a little bit different depending on how long you've been in business. If you're a quote unquote inside sales rep, your job might be a little bit more of a farmer, so to speak, rather than a hunter, where you're following up with people a little bit more than going out there and prospecting and generating new business. But these are the activities that, if you look at it, one of the biggest things that outperformers and top sales leaders do is they do not waste time. They only invest themselves in high value activities where they really look at it, and it's not like you get to a certain level of success in sales or otherwise, and they all of a sudden give you 26 hours in a day or 178 hours in a week rather than the 24 hours and 168 hours. It's not like they give you more time. So the only way that we can look at it in terms of high value and productivity is to truly look at it and to say, how am I spending my time and how am I allocating that each day to be able to deliver a result? And this kind of comes back to what I was talking about with routines as well, and being very disciplined and being very methodical about how you are spending that time. So hopefully that makes sense. Number 4, outperformers. I always say there is no failure, there's only feedback. And regardless of where you're watching this webinar from, I'm guessing you probably recognize this guy, even though he's been retired for a while. It's a slide of Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan, I believe, was the greatest basketball player that ever lived. I was a huge fan here in the States. He had one priceless commercial that said something to the effect of, I've missed over 3,000 shots in my career. 28 times I've been trusted to take the last shot and missed. I've lost almost 300 games. And he says, I've failed over and over and over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed. And it was such a priceless commercial. And part of the reason that I have this slide on here is because sales is not a game of success. Sales is actually a game of being able to manage your quote unquote failures or your mistakes, because I brought it up before. Regardless of how good you are in sales, you're probably going to hear a lot more no's than you do yeses. And it's such a myth that when we look at anybody that's been the greatest of all time in a sport, or somebody that's gotten into the top 1% of sales, it's such a myth that person, like, everything they do turns to gold and everything is just, it's easy for them because they're just a great communicator. That person was born with just the most talent, let's say. No, that's not the truth. What they actually do is they have a way of looking at that quote unquote failure and using it as feedback rather than something that's going to bring them down, which brings me to the last poll question, because this fits right into explanatory style. And I want to ask you, how many touches does it take for you to get an initial meeting with a prospect? On average, how many touches are we talking about? How many touch points? Go ahead and answer that. All right, a couple more seconds for the last responses to come in. All right, so the poll was 27% said 5, 53% said 6, and 20% said 8. And for the 20% of you, you are absolutely correct. It takes an average of 8 touches just to get an initial meeting, according to Top Performance and Sales Prospecting Research. And the reason that I'm talking about this, and that is a very high number, and I mean, either way, whether we're talking about 5, 6, or 8, like that's a high number to begin with, and it feeds into explanatory style and managing expectations. But I mean, I just think of something that happened recently to me, because speaking is a large part of my business, consulting with companies, whether it's on sales or leadership or anything else. And I told this story in a blog post not that long ago. There was a company that I really wanted to do business with, and I had actually met this person at a networking event. The person was the CEO of the company, and I reached out to him because I wanted to do business with him. Reached out to him once, he didn't respond. Reached out to him a second time, he didn't respond. Third time, no response, just dead silence, dead air. I reached out to this person 6 times and did not hear one thing back. Now, what would you be thinking if there was somebody that you really wanted to do business with and you reached out to them 6 times and you heard nothing? What you would probably be thinking was, what was difficult for me not to think was that, you know what, this person's just, they're too busy, they're not interested, they don't like me, they have no interest in what I have to offer. I should just give up. It really doesn't matter what I'm doing. But that 7th time that I contacted him, he gets right back to me when I sent him an email within 5 minutes and says, you know what, Scott, really apologize. My executive assistant has been out on maternity leave. I am just buried here, but I really want to do business with you. Let's set up a coffee meeting for next week. Set up the coffee meeting, and it ended up leading to a year-long proposal and engagement with that company. And that was all because I managed my expectations. And this is actually something that I don't think is done enough in sales, is that if we look at it, once you get a little bit better at sales and persuasion, some of the things, especially we'll talk about next week, can you cut that number down in terms of the number of touches it takes maybe to just get that initial meeting? And that initial meeting isn't even closing the sale. It's just the initial meeting to be able to sit down with someone. Can you cut down on that a little bit? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but the bottom line is managing the expectations up front that, you know what, it's going to take some time to be able to convince this person or get this person to take that virtual presentation or to be able to take that meeting. I think those expectations are key. And when we look at explanatory style, high achievers have been shown to have 3 different areas of their explanatory style that make them great at anything. And the first one is what we call personalization. Now, personalization is basically when you look at something and it's not that you say, how can I control outcomes, but it's something where you believe that what you are doing will actually influence outcomes and will allow you to be able to make them happen. So someone with like, and this is something that regardless of whether you've had a success or a failure in your life or in sales, we create these narratives and we create these sales stories that we tell ourselves. And one of the things I've seen from let's say sales amateurs is that they will just start to say, well, it doesn't matter what I do. Like it doesn't matter. It's a tough industry out there. It's just tough economy, tough times. our product is inferior, like these cold calls, these things don't matter. They will not actually take that personalization and will say, you know what, if I really commit and if I really invest myself to this and really prepare accordingly, I can actually influence this outcome, and I have a personal stake in being able to influence that. That's the first one. The second one is what we call permanence. Permanence is basically, for lack of a better term, is history condemned to repeat itself. Like, if you get a result one time, is that going to continue to happen over time? So let's say that every salesperson I've ever talked to has had an experience where maybe they've put out a proposal or they've done a presentation and they've absolutely bombed it. Like, it has not gone well, and it's ended up getting rejected. And they just look at it and they say, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Well, someone with a poor explanatory style and looking at permanence would say, because this happened one time, it is going to continue to happen. Rather than looking at it and saying, no, that's just one isolated incident, that's not going to affect things over time, and I can turn that around. And then the third one is what we call pervasiveness. And pervasiveness is one of the biggest things that I hear from people, is that everyone is price driven. You've probably heard this before. I always believe that price is only important in the absence of value, but I hear a lot of sales amateurs, or the norm, so to speak, play the game with, well, everybody just wants the lowest price. And pervasiveness is basically taking one thing and extrapolating that out to a lot of different scenarios. So let's say that you met with one customer that objected or ended up not going with your product or program or service because they wanted the cheapest thing. Well, now does that all of a sudden mean that every single person you meet with also just wants the lowest price? No, that's not true at all. It just happened to be this one person. And if you look at these three different things, I think one of the greatest skills any of us can have is self-awareness. And whether you're looking at these things from your own end, or if you happen to be a sales manager or a sales leader where you have other salespeople reporting to you, I would encourage you to look at these different things when you are talking to people about their sales business, because you will start to hear different aspects of these things when they create a narrative or when they tell a sales story about what's going on. I think of a sales rep that I met with not that long ago that was part of a large company, wasn't getting the results that he wanted, wasn't necessarily going out there and doing the activity that the sales leader wanted him to do. And a lot of what I was hearing was that, well, you know what? I mean, anytime that I do this cold email marketing or I do these cold calls, the person doesn't respond. And whenever I get to a part where, I can negotiate, the person always just wants price. And it was actually reframing some of these things and talking them through. No, that's just a narrative and a story you're telling yourself that isn't reality. That ended up being a game changer in terms of that explanatory style. So this is where, if you can manage these three things, I promise it will all change, and you will start to look at, it's all just part of the process in terms of, I need to contact this person 5, 6, 8 times, whatever it happens to be. And it will help you so much in terms of your success rate if you can manage that explanatory style. And last but not least is outperformers condition their mind. And I mean, it's part of the reason that you're on this webinar right now. But I sometimes say you condition the mind like you condition the body. It's not like you can jump on a webinar or you can listen to a great podcast one time and all of a sudden it's going to massively change your mindset. The same way that you can't go and you can't exercise, you can't run, or you can't lift weights one time and think that is going to make you fit. Like, this is actually something that has to be done repeatedly over time. And we have learned more about the human brain in the last 5 years than we knew in the last 500. Like, it used to just kind of be thought that everything was pretty much stable in regards to your personality. Like, you're just an introvert or an extrovert. You're just outgoing or you're shy. And it's actually been shown through neuroplasticity that you are able to change and mold and shape your mindset based on the Aristotle and we are what we repeatedly do. So what does this look like? It was Brian Tracy that said the average person, he called it your mobile university, but the average person spends 500 to 1,000 hours in their car every year. And this is here in the States, this is in America, but whether we're talking about being in the car, maybe on public transportation or whatever it happens to be, it's a massive number of hours. And what 500 to 1,000 hours means is that's not only the equivalent of a university level education, but if you break that down, that is 12 and a half to 25 40-hour weeks that you are spending in your car, let's say every single year. And I always ask people, how are you investing that time? Because it's time that's going to go by either way, and being able to maximize that or being able to use that to the best of your ability, I think is critical as far as having a great mindset. So to look at just conditioning your mind, and this doesn't just have to be what you're doing in your car, but I use that just as a staggering example of the amount of time that we do actually spend there. To me, it's never been easier to be able to absorb information, quality information in multiple mediums, anywhere, anytime. And you can do it through video, you can do it through audio, you can do it through written. Video, I love watching TED Talks on a variety of topics, not just sales, but persuasion, psychology, high performance, success, achievement, anything. I think TED Talks are great. YouTube, webinars like you're on right now. The audio part of it, I mean, I want you to think about, maybe you're out there and you're a podcast fan. And I mean, there are some certain podcasts that I love listening to, sales and non-sales related. But what most people don't realize about podcasts is that basically all of them are free. And if you can seek out the good ones, if you're just looking at it from a sales perspective, imagine that you have the ability to listen to someone that is a world-class performer in your space, give you free information and advice on how to do your business better. Is that not something that you would want to sign up for and that you would want to do? And that's what you have with podcasts, especially ones where I usually gravitate towards the ones where a podcaster is interviewing someone that's an expert in their field, and you have the ability to gain new insights and new ways on doing your business better. And then there's certainly the written form. There's blogs, there's articles, industry-specific magazines. I think of like Selling Power, Success, different things like that. But just continually immersing yourself in the intrinsic pursuit of growth and development, I think is absolutely key. And I will always say that readers are leaders and learners are earners. Like, they just are. When we look at top achievers in anything, they are always looking at ways of how can I get better. And this is something that is stacked up over time, that if you just invest small amounts of time repeatedly in mastering your mindset, it's not necessarily something that you notice. You won't notice it in a day, and you probably won't notice it in a week. But over the course of a month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, now all of a sudden your business and your sales performance looks completely different. That's what happens. So to close this out, I just want to invite anybody that's on the webinar, if you liked the information that you got here from this webinar and you would like more strategies on peak performance, psychology, persuasion, raising your game, and being your best every single day, you can text the word Outperform to 38470. You could also go on my website, scottwelle.com, and I send out free information and strategies every single week to be able to be your best. So I want to invite everyone to be able to do that. And I just really want to finish this up with a case study. That is, this isn't a company-wide case study. This is just an individual case study of someone that I worked with that was in financial advising and wealth management. And he'd gotten to a place where he was reasonably successful in his business, but the bottom line is he'd plateaued, and he was spending a lot of his time on busy tasks and not necessarily productive tasks and things that moved the needle. So we did 90 days of personal peak performance coaching on really going deep and looking at, is he playing to win when he's reaching out to people? Is he structuring the vital 4% and his most valuable tasks? How is his calendar being managed as far as outperforming activities? What is his explanatory style when he gets results that he might not want? And how is he stacking up the small things as far as conditioning the mind for peak performance? And again, to come down to some of the results, they were unbelievable. He achieved his highest level ever with the company. They have different levels based on your gross revenue. That also increased 10% month over month. So he not only broke through a previous performance barrier and had his best performance that he's ever had in the business, but that bottom part where he went from the top 20% to top 2% in, they call it CEI, but it's the customer experience inventory. Not only was he getting phenomenal results as far as his business and commissions and revenue goes, but the customers also felt it, and their experience of doing business with him was so much better. And when you look at this and you look at a key to success from this webinar, what I would love to have every single person do is to look at this and to take ownership of it. When I started at the beginning, I said, if you were to just get one or two things from this webinar, what would those be, and what are some things that you can implement right now into your sales life and into your business? And if you just want to go ahead and, because this comes on you from an accountability standpoint, what would that look like? I'd love it if you would enter in the chat box what you got out of this webinar, what you are going to do, where we are going to move from the information to the implementation part of it. I think that's where we all outperform. And I'm telling you, if you stack up some of these small things and start to implement them, the effects that you can have personally, professionally, and everything else are just absolutely massive. So with that being said, I would love for you to enter that in the chat box, and I am going to hang out here and answer any questions that anyone has on what I talked about and how you could potentially achieve peak performance psychology and better results in your sales business. So thank you very much for being here.